in my career had never had black and white answers, but in school, it's always this is right and this is wrong. So I think I also have to embrace the gray a little bit and allow kids to realize that it's not real world's not black and white in any way, shape, or form.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening. I'm excited to tell you about this book I came across last summer. It's written by two young new authors, Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky. It's called Make Time: How to Focus on What Matters Every Day. I have no idea how I even came across the book or what drew me to it. Maybe it was my subconscious telling me my time management needed a reboot, because it occurred to me after reading the book that time management changes with time. Of course, there are the staples of time management, like avoiding procrastination and the necessity of focus, but the causes, the cures, and the priorities change with each generation. When I began my current career 20 years ago, I was all over the time management books. I was already homeschooling first and third grade children and managing a home. How was I ever going to take on this new role as an executive overseeing a school that operated in 3 counties? Add to that, the location of the school's office was an hour and a half from my home, way down at the south end of where the school operated. Now, keep in mind, this was long before COVID and Zoom. I needed to figure out a way to stay connected with staff and ensure our administration was running smoothly and meeting all our requirements as a public charter school. The book that offered the most useful advice for me at that time was Work Less, Make More. It was published in 1999. I still have the book, and I continue to cherish it, not only because it saved my sanity, but because the cover page has the scribbles of one of my children practicing the alphabet when I wasn't looking. That book was also the first book I ever wrote in. Up until that time, I had a mark-in-book phobia, which of course was influenced by teachers who told me it is bad to write in books. For the first time in my life, I underlined and wrote notes in a book. After chapter 1, I sat back to see what would happen, and nothing. There were no negative repercussions at all. No one yelled at me, no one fined me. It was such an enlightening experience. Books are meant to not only read, but to be used. And if it takes some lines, scribbles, notes, and page bending to get more out of it, go for it. And as a side note, yes, it was my own book, not something I borrowed from the library or the school or someone else. So anyways, I'm kind of digressing here, but fast forward 22 years, I have a library of what my teachers would have referred to as soiled books. And I continue to use them to this day. So today we have the privilege of hearing from Connor Swenson, who heads the Make Time at Work program. And before you turn this off because you're thinking to yourself, I'm not working right now, remember, work does not just mean a job that earns income. We all engage in work. As a student, our work is our studies. As a parent, our work is our children. As an unemployed person wishing we were employed, our work is preparing for our next employment. So let's see what Connor has to say. And be sure to check out our show notes on the Element is Everything website for more information about the book, the program, and Connor.
So nice to be introduced.
Nice to meet you. So our podcast is about finding your element. And even though we operate 2 schools, K-12 schools, we believe that finding your element is something that it's a lifelong thing. It's allowed to change. Our priorities change. But regardless of our age, there's always something we want to focus on.
Yeah.
Whether it's your studies or your career or, even just managing a family. And so I was hoping to get some information from you as far as the make time model, where it came
Yeah,
from and how it works.
absolutely. I love it. My introduction to Make Time came when I was working for Google. And I started my career at Google in New York in 2013 and spent a year there before transferring out to sort of the HQ in California. I lived in San Francisco and worked down in Mountain View, where Google's headquartered. And I think like a lot of people that, join a new job, especially at a place like Google, I didn't come in the traditional application process. I kind of got in the back door. So I felt I was surrounded by brilliant, motivated, ambitious people doing amazing stuff. And as much as, I might have critiques of Google these days, I think there's still just so much amazing innovation at the company. And like lots of people, I think my first reaction was to work as hard as I could. Right.
Right.
So I think it's a natural reaction. You just think, okay, if I'm going to keep up, if I'm going to be, promoted, if I'm going to get onto the fun projects, I've really got to lean in. And for most of us, working hard means longer hours, staying nights. When I started in New York, it wasn't uncommon to come in on the weekend and there'd be plenty of people toiling away. And I started to realize pretty soon, within a year or two, that there was a downside to this mentality, this sort of always on, sort of constant responsiveness, and the sort of culture of immediacy, which I was kind of creating within myself and which was present at Google. I started to see that the more I leaned on sort of like productivity ideas, the more I tried to get faster and more efficient just so I could do more, the kind of quicker I was running on this sort of hamster wheel, and it didn't really allow me to make time for the things that mattered. And I was really fortunate because when I moved to San Francisco, I was working for a team called Google for Entrepreneurs back then, and it was housed within the larger Google Ventures team, which does startup investments on behalf of Google. And I met Jake and John. So Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky are the co-authors of Make Time. And they hadn't written the book yet, but they were spending a lot of time with startups that Google had invested in. And they were doing these design sprints, these 5-day sprints, trying to help them solve big problems that teams would spend weeks or months or years on. Can you do it in 5 days? And resetting the defaults of how teams work, right? Instead of trying to put a big project amidst all the meetings and the status updates and the quarterly reviews, like what if we just brought everyone together for 5 days, put the laptops to the side and we just sprinted on this. And they had huge progress. Teams loved it, but people were like, well, you can't do a sprint every week,
Right.
It's
So what does that look like? Are you talking like basically 24/7? You're all locked up together?
it's not quite that. Although when they started, because you're working with startups, the inclination, the default, the automatic kind of thinking was, look, we got to work as hard and as long as we can on these days. But they started to realize by Wednesday, Thursday of this 5-day week, if they were working late, if they weren't fueling up with healthy foods, they weren't taking breaks, that people just started to fade, right? Not like you're just tired physically, but you're mentally, creatively tired. And so they learned, okay, actually, we need to break these days up. We need to have a real lunch break. We need to get people outside. We need to energize, and we need to really respect that it's not always about working harder and longer. So Jake and John had this like kind of like a laboratory for redesigning time. And they were learning a lot, and they were trying to think, well, what if we could apply everything we're learning from the design sprint to your day to day? Instead of thinking about redesigning a week, right, where the whole team is all together, what if you just redesigned each and every day and use some of what they learned from the design sprint? And so this is how the kind of Make Time model was born. And it was born while we were at Google Ventures together. And I was lucky enough to be friendly with the two of them, and they call themselves the Time Dorks, and we're very, I think, kindred souls in that aspect. And so I was taking some of what they were learning and thinking, instead of living your life on this never-ending to-do list where you're constantly just trying to check off small tasks, they came up with this thing called the highlight. right? And it's not maybe the new or novel concept, like you've said, right? These ideas have been around, but it's that one big thing that you kind of structure your day around. You plan it and you protect and prioritize it. And I started using a highlight every day, 60 to 90 minutes, trying to get that thing that was really going to, needed to get done, or something I just really wanted, even though it wasn't urgent, it was important to me. I wanted to spend time on it. And I started to really notice feeling more satisfied, more getting better results, being more effective. Then I started doing some of the tactics that they call laser, which is about kind of resetting the defaults of technology, specifically removing a bunch of apps on my phone. We were talking about our phones a second ago, right?
Right.
Taking social media, turning news and notifications off, and started to really realize, wow, even, helped me while I was at work, but then I was just more present and engaged outside of that because my phone wasn't constantly playing tug of war with my attention. And then energize, you said, were they sprinting 24/7 for the 5 days? But no, they were learning, you got to take breaks. You got to get outside. You got to move. You got to sleep. You got to have quiet time. And all those little pieces kind of made this make time model and changed my life in such a huge way. I was just constantly kind of on the edge of burnout and exhaustion when I joined Google, and then I started using these tactics and these ideas, and it's worked for me. It works for lots of other people. It's not the be all end all, but I think it is a really simple and friendly toolkit that people can rely on.
I really found it interesting, the energize section, when they talk about eat right and exercise, because a lot of people are going to read that and think, wait a minute, what? You're asking me to add more to my list of things to do.
Right.
So you work with a lot of companies. Is it a one-time presentation? Here's our model, or do you check in with them afterwards?
You're right. You can read a book like Make Time and think, oh, I have to do all these other things. And it's really not the philosophy that we believe in, where it's not saying you need to adopt a new diet or a new workout plan, or you need to add all these things to your lives. We think it's these small shifts to your defaults. This is this kind of word we keep coming back to. What we really aim to do is to have workshops where we really not just teach you the framework, but it's really engaging. We apply it. We break it up into 3-4 sessions over a number of weeks. So they're short and sharp and actionable, and you got some homework. But you don't just have more things to do. You've got your teammates helping you, and you're trying to kind of focus on one bit of the puzzle at a time. So we usually start with the highlight, and we send people back and say, okay, just try to do a highlight every day. Try to get it on your calendar, see what gets in the way, and then take notes, which is the fourth step. So the 4 steps are highlight, laser, energize, and then reflect. And reflect is so important because you might realize I'm a morning person. I love the highlight, before everyone else is logged into their computers. Whereas I might think, I actually like to do the highlight, later in the afternoon when people have started checking out and I feel like I've got some space. So we really try to allow people the space to test it out, then to come back together, in week 2 and digest it and share with each other what happened. I like to think I'm a decent facilitator, but I think it's more important is the reflection amongst the groups, right? Because we often learn so much about ourselves in conversation. As you probably know, hosting a podcast, we learn so much about ourselves hearing other people share similar reflections, right? And we fall off, things get in the way. And then what's important is not that, being perfect. What's important is when you have a day or a week or a month that's off, you kind of go, okay, that was yesterday, that was last week, today's a new day. And this is where I think Make Time is great, because it's a daily framework. It's not you might have used other productivity and time management tools that are kind of a job in and of themselves to maintain and manage. And if you get behind on your special style of journaling, it feels like you got to catch up. Whereas Make Time, there's no catch up. You just start each day, you pick a highlight, you block out some of those things that are going to distract you. So you have a supportive environment, you energize, you take a couple notes, and you try it again the next day.
Reboot is the natural part of it.
Yes, rebooting.
If the people that you've worked with, any stories that stand out for you as far as aha moments that people have had?
Oh man, I have 2. I mean, one, working with a group in a woman in the workshop is from Israel. One of the tactics we have is called distraction kryptonite. Okay, so it's like Superman. Your listeners, maybe mostly American, will know. Sometimes I have to, Superman is international. I'm in London, but sometimes I have to explain. Superman is powerless when faced with kryptonite, right? This is his Achilles heel, if you will. Our hypothesis is that we all have our own distraction kryptonite. It might be a website, it might be an app, whatever it is. It's that thing that you open your phone to check the weather, and then 30 minutes later, you're kind of scrolling through this infinitely going, what happened here? So we have this tactic, which is like, just remove it. Don't try to fight it every day. Don't try to resist it with willpower. It doesn't work. Just take it off your phone, see how life is without it. And so hers was Instagram, common for lots of us these days. And she removed Instagram, and that weekend she spent it visiting the Dead Sea in Israel, which is just a magical place. If you've ever had the chance to visit and float, it's something else. And she came back the next week and she said, I didn't realize, but for years now, every time I'm traveling, even on a small trip, just within my, couple hours to go see and go for a swim, I'm constantly feeling this urge to just document and to make, to capture everything that happens. I'm so obsessed with that. And this weekend was the first time in probably 5 years that I had that urge, and I realized, well, I don't have Instagram, and like, I'm just gonna enjoy what this is. She said, I took a picture on my phone, put my phone away, and I was just there. And she came back, and such a simple shift, right? But she was just like, I just so much, enjoyed and was so much more present and so much more engaged, and still got the value, still took a picture, but didn't have to, create 10 different videos for the story and document everything. And so that was nice. And
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And then someone just shared just recently in a workshop we wrapped up in September that, they have a couple kids at home, and they realized that when they felt time stressed, right? When there was just too much to do, they got short with their kids. Yeah. They realized that over lockdown and the pandemic, that it's been more like that. Work had piled up, felt like there was a constant backlog, and the kids are around a lot, which was great, but also they're demanding a little bit more attention and time. And she had this big realization throughout the series that was like, wow, it's when I feel like I need to be checking things off my to-do list, and my kid comes and they need something, that I can feel short. And by practicing that shift, I'm going to do the highlight every day, getting away from that to-do list and being a little bit more forgiving, that like, hey, you can't be perfect every day. You're not going to finish everything. You just got to pick your top couple things, focus on them, do your best. She started to just realize a huge shift in how she was kind of experiencing being with her children. And I thought that was, there's plenty of people that have finished a project or done a professional thing, but the ones that stick with me are, the weekend in the desert with your friends, or that changed relationship with your kid. That I think this is what it all comes down to, right? It's the stuff that really matters.
Right. I like that. There's the work that needs to be done, and then there's the things that really matter.
Yeah.
And sometimes they are one and the same. But if I'm understanding what you're saying, we're making them be one and the same a little too much.
Yeah. Some of us, it's certainly been something I've had to pick apart, and, living in the UK for 5.5 years now, and experiencing lots of cultures, traveling. And I used to work across Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Google. So a lot of differing attitudes about work and professional, advancement, and how that fits into our life. So I've started to kind of see a little bit, my attitude, being raised in the US, we are a real work-centric culture, right? And your job can really become who you are to an extent. And, especially if you live like I did in New York City, where it's kind of the defining attribute of people. What do you do? Right. And it's not to say it's, as long as you're conscious, you're choosing that, you're recognizing it, go get it, but it's kind of the default where we're taking work is paramount to everything else that happens in our lives. And we're not here to tell you what's important. We have, a great exercise that we do in the workshops where we help people think about what's important. But I do think for a lot of us, it's much more common. And I've taught the Make Time framework to, if I could, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people in the last year. I'd have to say 80% at least when I say what matters most, and they rank it by where they're spending their time. And I say, Terry, what is actually out of alignment? What do you really wish you were spending more time on? 8, 9 times out of 10, it's not a professional. It's not something that they're just. Sometimes it's exercising. It's getting outside. It's gardening. With my kids, spending time with an ailing grandparent. Anything that it could be, it's on that list. And so I think for most of us, it is likely that the things that matter for a lot of us, it's stuff that's outside of work. The balance tends to be a bit skewed, I think, these days.
Yeah. Well, so what I hear you describing is the new work ethic.
Yeah.
So with you and Jake and John, you guys seem to have what I refer to as found your element through this whole process when you guys were at Google and you were going through all this. And now you guys are in this really good groove. You're finding a lot of balance in your life. Have you come across other people that have gone through this whole framework and said, I need to go in a different direction?
Yeah. I've definitely had some folks who got connected to our work, and over time they had the slow realization that actually what I'm doing right now, how my life looks, is not exactly how I want it to look. And I've been kind of leading the Make Time at Work program since February of last year. So I left Google 2 weeks before the pandemic, and this has been an interesting journey. So I have to say as well that my experience and hearing those stories, it takes place in a broader cultural moment that we're in. We sometimes called the Great Resignation. It's been termed in the Twitter sphere and elsewhere. And I think the pandemic has given people a moment to stop, slow down, and reflect. And some of those people have done that while using sort of Make Time. And it has been a really profound moment for people to think, what am I doing? Where am I living? What is my relationship to work? Do I want to have a family? If so, when? It's like, I know so many new families getting started in this last year, so many moves across the world, so many job switches. So, and I think burnout and overwork are a big part of it. They did a study in Canada, a few thousand executives. I think the Globe and Mail, I think, is the paper that published this, but something like 75% of sort of mid to senior level executives, 75% were looking for a new job, wanting to quit their job the next 3 to 6 months, basically immediately. And they cited the number one factor was exhaustion and burnout. So I think people are having that moment, especially in really high paced, high stress, demanding jobs, thinking, maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. Maybe I'm climbing a ladder, but the ladder is, on the wrong wall, as it's said sometimes. So, yeah, there's definitely been a lot of folks that have had that and talked with us about that. And Make Time has helped people get a sense a little bit on what's important. And, we're not saying, I'm not going and saying, look, go ahead, quit your job. Often small marginal tweaks to how you spend your time every day can make a huge impact over time. So that's my approach is always these 1% changes, just slow, steady, sustainable. But sometimes, you got to do the 180 and change direction full on. So it's to each his or her own.
Right. Well, and you're talking about making the changes in your personal life to balance it, but I'm also hearing about people making those tweaks even in their work life, sitting down with supervisors and saying, you know what, I'm getting a lot more done at home.
Yeah.
And they have something to show for it. Or changing their hours and even changing their roles and realizing the only reason we're doing this is because we've always done it this way.
Yes.
But we either don't really even need to still do it, or there's better ways to do it.
Yeah.
Even within your work, you can make
Yes.
those changes.
And this is something we are working on with teams all the time and thinking, what are those things you've always done and you're doing them that way because you've always done it that way? How do you shift that? And hybrid working, right? This kind of, a little in the office, a little out of the office, companies going fully remote. We've had our work this last 18 months has taken place amidst that. And so it's a tremendous opportunity to kind of rebuild the scaffolding and to think, okay, like maybe taking 8 hours in a row of back-to-back Zoom meetings when I don't even schedule time to have lunch or go to the bathroom isn't a sustainable long-term strategy for how I want to be my best self at work. We go, okay, maybe I need to think about a lunch break. What's that look like? And then teams going, okay, maybe we don't need to do these 4 all-hand meetings every week. Maybe we do 2, and then we send email updates, and so people can asynchronously read about what's going on instead of having to have an hour amongst 8 or 10 people where you're all just sharing updates. And so there's all these small tweaks. And my favorite personally is, why don't we just take this meeting on a walk? Let me just give you a ring, right? That when someone says, hey, let's do this meeting, I go, hey, could we also maybe do it on the phone and not on Zoom so I can step outside because it's beautiful in London this afternoon? And people say, yeah, okay, let's do it. You expertly utilize that for your own good. So
you work with businesses,
yeah,
and I work with K-12 students. If I was queen, we would completely revamp what we do with our high schoolers.
Yeah.
Because you are younger and you were a high schooler more recent than I have been, and you are, coming into this work world. If you were king and could design high school, what would be some changes you feel would better prepare teens for adulthood?
That's a great question. I'll have to send this to my principal at Wayzata High School back in Minnesota. So to me, I think the number one goal of education is to ignite or to inspire the curiosity and the desire to learn in a student. Like that's it in a sense, because you surely learn some practical things and you learn how to read and how to write, and you learn helpful basic ground rules of how the world operates. But most of what I do today, I didn't learn in school. This is about relearning and being interested and curious about how to improve and how to correct certain failures and how to improve strengths. And I'm getting a bit emotional talking about my high school, but I think what's really hard is in most schools, mine particularly, is like, you have a set curriculum and the deviation from that is extremely minimal. Maybe you get a little leeway on a term paper to say, hey, you can pick the president you want to write a paper about, or, pick a military conflict that you want to dive into, or a science experiment that you want to understand and run. But I think a lot of it's tough because it's individualized. And I think schooling, I graduated high school with 900 students. And so, they're doing their best, but it's industrial education at some level. So they're trying to make sure everyone can get through the grades and pass the tests. And I think the people that I've seen that have done the most interesting things that have been, successful in a broad sense, not just financial, but just in life, have been the ones that have never stopped learning. Right. And so I don't know what that looks like in practicality, right? That's probably giving people more of a self-directed option to say, hey, if you have a big curiosity in something, like, we're going to let you design your learning experience around that. I was incredibly interested in international relations and foreign affairs. I didn't have a lot of that in my high school. So to say, okay, cool, why don't you tell us, like, what does this look like? You want to draft a UN bill and tell us how it's going to work, and tell us the countries that need to sign, whatever it is, giving kids are just so endlessly creative and curious. And if you let them be themselves, I think there's a lot there. But I think the hard piece is how do you do that, but also make sure that I guess people progress along a similar pathway, because it ultimately they're trying to move kids through the school system and get them out and test it out. So somehow it's about inspiring creativity and getting rid of all the testing. I almost nothing I did at Google was right or wrong. There's very, very, very few things, but 7 years there, that you could actually say, Connor, this is true, this is false. Your decision at work, everything is gray. When you're working with ideas and in the knowledge economy and creating things, it's all a judgment call. It's all, this is how I thought about this, and this is why we're going to do this for this marketing campaign, or this is how I'm evaluating this partner. But you almost, in my career, had never had black and white answers. But in school, it's always, this is right and this is wrong. So I think I also have to embrace the gray a little bit and allow kids to realize that it's not the real world's not black and white in any way, shape, or form. So that's what I got. That's what I got.
Thank you. That's perfect. That's exactly what our schools strive to do. So,
oh, wonderful.
That's why I can't wipe the smile off my face right now.
Yeah.
Connor, thank you so much for your time and for sharing the Make Time model with us. Thanks for the work that you do. This is very timely, as you mentioned, with COVID. And so it's great that there's a resource for people to turn to.
Thanks everyone that listened. And yeah, there's tons of free resources on the Make Time website. We'll link out to lots of articles, and yeah, got my own site and publish some articles myself. So we'll share all of that. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's fun to connect, and thanks everyone for listening.
Connor touched on the daily highlight, where you start each day by choosing a highlight to prioritize your day. Then you make sure you stay focused on that highlight, and then later reflect on how well you did at the end of the day. The process helps us see what ways we are or can make sure we have at least one thing we do each day that gives us a sense of fulfillment. I've tried it, and I'm telling you, it has made a world of difference for me. It's really nice going to bed each night with a sense of achievement rather than being focused on the unchecked boxes of the list. Sometimes the highlight is something big, like the completion of a big project. And sometimes, even if it's small, it feels like something big because it's been something that's been nagging at me. And sometimes it's just a sense of joy, reminding me of the things that matter. So the Reflect and Connect challenge for this episode is to practice the daily highlight. But first, I have an extra challenge for you this time. I could really use your help to spread the word to others. Share our podcast on one or more social media sites. Tag Element Education and include the hashtags #FindYourElement and EdChat. Each post will be worth one entry into our drawing for a free copy of the Make Time book, which will take place Friday, October 15th. We'll notify the winners through your social media site. Okay, back to the daily highlight. Make time by creating your own data. Each day, identify a highlight. Think of what it is that's giving you a sense of urgency, or what would feel significant, or maybe what would just simply bring you joy. At the end of the day, reflect on whether you made time for it and how well you were able to focus on it. Then, at the end of a week, look back at your data. What is helping you achieve your highlights, your mindset, your environment, your habits? And then what might be getting in the way? If you need to work on it more, what adjustments will you commit to making? The more data you create, the more clear the picture gets, and the more you realize how you can make time to find your element.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Element is Everything. If you found anything in this podcast worth knowing, please share it with a friend, a teacher, a business leader, or other decision maker. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe wherever you are listening now to be notified of future episodes. We appreciate your suggestions and feedback, which you can provide through the Element is Everything website under Contact. Or you can simply email elementiseverything@myelement.org. Our hope is to help listeners discover the path to their element, who will then help others do the same. Live life to the fullest. Live life in your element.